Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album, the surprise album from Earl Sweatshirt, titled, I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside. But first, let's start with a serious question. Does Odd Future have any buzz anymore? I don't mean that to be a slight against the rap collective, I really don't. For a group that leapt out of the underground with a fully formed style and sound that has won them a fair bit of critical acclaim and a strong cult following. And for a couple of years at the very beginning of the decade, it seemed like the group was gonna ride that wave of hype to album after album of success. Not especially in the mainstream, given the subject matter and their style, but there would be some form of success here. But across 2014, Odd Future seemed to drop off the face of the earth. Yeah, there were a few scattered mixtapes, but none of the big names dropped full-length records. And outside of some touring controversy that got their members banned from a New Zealand tour, Odd Future was pretty quiet. Now, if you were to go back 20 years, there'd be no issue with this. Albums and mixtapes, they take time to make if you're gonna do them right. And if Odd Future really are secretly cooking things up, it'd be good to see a quality project. I'm enthusiastic about that. But we're also talking about the rapidly shifting landscape of hip-hop, where rap collectives live and die by their buzz. And with the internet, that time has only gotten faster, especially for indie rap artists. And that means the unfortunate question isn't so much when the new Odd Future project would drop, but who outside their diehard fanbase would care when it did. But out of nowhere, it looks as though we do have a new record dropping. And honestly, from the last person that I would expect, Earl Sweatshirt, the slightly off-kilter oddball of the group that initially built his reputation off of his darkly hyperbolic subject matter before destroying almost all of it with his surprisingly personal and introspective debut, Doris. Now, back when I reviewed that debut way in 2013, back before I even had a decent camera, and while I definitely liked it, it wasn't a record I saw myself going back to very often. It was slow, it was dark and dreary, with Earl Sweatshirt's cadence and very somber beats making it a very heavy listen. Now, having gone back through it recently though, I can definitely say I appreciated how meticulous and well structured it is, balancing out some real social commentary with a very personal story that was well told. In other words, of the rappers in Odd Future, I got the impression there was the most depth and layers behind Earl Sweatshirt. I was just surprised that he'd be the first to the punch for a resurgence in not Tyler the Creator or Frank Ocean. And with a surprise album with few features and nothing from Odd Future outside of a bit of production, it looked to be an interesting listen. So, what did we get here? Well, it's kind of odd. On the one hand, I barely feel like I got anything, or maybe just a glorified mixtape at best. Because Earl Sweatshirt's I Don't Like Shit, I Don't Go Outside has less than a half hour of music on it for 10 songs. The average is around 3 minutes. In other words, it seems like Earl took the criticisms that Doris felt long and cut his material down to the absolute limit. And yet, on the other hand, I can't deny what he did provide was pretty damn excellent. It shows real improvement from his debut album. If AWOL Nation got stripping things down to the raw center all wrong, Earl Sweatshirt gets it right. And as such, we get the sort of very short album that will definitely leave a listener hungry for more. In other words, this is a damn great album. So let's first talk about Earl Sweatshirt himself. And I'll admit, initially I had a fair amount of difficulty getting a real handle on him, but this record probably gives me the clearest picture of him as an MC to date. And it's not exactly an easy picture to really take in. An incredibly strong and insightful, yet very young MC who has seen and done too much in too little time, and who can only find fragments of solace despite the immense responsibilities and pressure crushing down upon him. And what's a little startling is the loneliness that racks this album, the self-imposed loneliness, the loss of his grandmother, his strained relationship with his mother, his absentee father, a failed relationship with a vindictive ex-girlfriend, distance between himself and the rest of Odd Future, and the feeling that the darkness he used to spit in his lyrics has become his reality. There isn't so much depression or sadness, but dispassionate bitterness and disgust on this album, trying to blunt real pain however he possibly can, which leads to a flow that has energy but not exactly emotive passion, with enough buried intensity and charisma though to draw attention to every single bar. He himself admits that he doesn't really care about rap in the same way anymore, and he wonders why that passion seems to be gone. But it's not as if he can exactly stop rapping now, can he? Now, even from that description, you'd think that Earl would pick guest stars that deal in similar dark, introspective themes. Even though I'm not a sadistic fan by a long shot, he'd probably fit very well in this album. Or, you know what, he'd keep this entirely as a solo affair. But the few guests that he does bring on outside of the established norm, they mostly work. Dash's inclusion on Grownups adds a lot of uncomfortable poignancy to the track. We'll get to this. And while Wiki from Rat King is a bit of an odd fit against that production on that song, the songwriting of unfulfilled expectations from the past and getting by now, it does fit well with Earl's verse. But you know what? Vince Staples' verse on Wool could have afforded a little bit more structure and technical rhyming skill to match its content, and Nikel's verse on DNA, while being good, didn't exactly fit well with Earl's verse, at least for me. And really, Vince's verse didn't fit great against Earl's either. Putting aside the extremely abrupt ending on that song, for as much as both tracks focus on harsh street life, reality, and violence, the framing is slightly different, where Vince describes it as a necessary reality that he wants to fight against. It gets a little bit more political. Earl is more outright aggressive because, once again, on this album, it's all of Earl's story. So let's talk about that story, shall we? Which takes us to our lyrics and themes. Now, I've already said I'm a fan of Earl's bars and well-structured rhymes, and described his driving impulses behind the dispassionate solitude and isolation that Earl Sweatshirt is trudging into on this album. But what gets interesting is delving into his own rationale and his excuses, that I get the feeling that even he thinks rings a little bit hollow, especially in the album's standout track, Grief. He spits graphic violence only to see it reflected in his imitators or in the eyes of his fans, and he's more than aware that without them, he wouldn't have made it. He wouldn't be where he is, even though he's not sure that he likes what he sees. And throughout this album, you see Earl both castigating his challengers and those who did him wrong, and yet always reaching for Xanax and weed and alcohol and painkillers to blunt his own pain. He's building walls around himself full of distrust and hatred, half out of necessity, but half because it's the only thing he feels he can do to stay sane in this world. And I get the feeling that he hates building those walls. It's why the song Grownups hits so goddamn hard for me, where he tries to throw up the greatest wall of all, maturity, and yet he sees the reflection of his absentee father when he does it, a father he can't really like or respect, and realizes he might be more lost now than ever before. But here's the thing, songs like Inside show that there is indeed that buried spark for Earl Sweatshirt, that passion, trying to be stifled by the industry around him, and yet, because he's so internally self-reliant, he's gonna figure out a way to subvert that industry and give them what they want out of him, what they expect from him, but also find a way to get out the truth. And if nobody's gonna stand with him or gonna follow along in his lane, he's just gonna do it on his own. All the rest of them be damned. So, wow, that's a lot about the content and a lot I like. What about the production? Well, here's the funny thing. I actually really did like what Earl Sweatshirt did with the instrumentation on this album, mostly wish that he handled himself, but it's also where I've got my biggest nitpick on this record, and it comes back to the very spirit of minimalism that Earl Sweatshirt uses throughout the most of this album. He stripped things down to their most basic form, often a slightly off-kilter melodic sample that's a little bit jazzy, and a thicker, grimier beat, and he's not afraid to get dark really fast. Even the brighter organ tones on Huey has a melancholic tone. Most of the production is much grimmer, like a cavernous stuttering and echoing a rattle of mantra that almost reminded me of The Cure with its melodic tone, the dirty double-kick beat of Faucet, the bass-heavy density of Grief, the layered cracks and booms of Grownups against the solitary piano note, or that deep-set snap of Inside against those faded synthesizers. And so much of it has this earthy, organic tone to it that I really loved. A trudge down a broken, overgrown road where the plants split the concrete are long dead. Nothing gleams or sparkles on this album, and whenever it does, it feels just sort of out of place or just slightly wrong, just kind of off-kilter and uneasy. That leads to my one nitpick on this album, the instrumental interludes. Now don't get me wrong, they do fit the record in terms of spacing out the ruthless and methodical bars, and the placement of the chintzy TV theme-esque at the very end of Grief does work as an instrumental motif, showing Earl trying to attain some facet of normality amidst all of that darkness. But on a record as short as this, every bit of space has real value, and when the number of bars per song is as limited as it is, I'm left wishing we could have traded many of those spaces for more verses, more bars. I wanted to hear more from this guy. As it is, it just feels a little bit indulgent from him. Odd bits of excess on a record that's too lean to really afford it or back it up. So in summary, okay, look, this album will not be for everyone. Between the layered bars, the dispassionate flow, and the dark production, Earl Sweatshirt does not care about making this album accessible. Hell, some would argue that he doesn't care at all about this album, coasting by on talent instead of actual effort, crafting an easy, great album instead of a classic simply because he can, he's just that good. But you pierce through the mask, and you see too many moments of meticulous craftsmanship and real vulnerable humanity, and whittling down to the bones, Earl Sweatshirt did manage to find a real core to this album, and it hit me a lot harder than I really expected. So yeah, for me, strong 8 out of 10, definitely a recommendation. But keep in mind, this will not be an easy listen. This one takes time to really take in. You probably won't get it after the first 5 or 6 listens. Earl might feel that he's one of the few in his crew that's actually trying to grow up and move on. And on this album, he might be the first to tap into the real darkness that comes with growing up and comes with actually getting there. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, or anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.